Erev Tov, everyone. The Parsha of Shmini is really a Parsha that has to do with laws, with chukim that are not really readily explicable or logical to us. Naturally, the story with the two sons of Aaron, not of Haviu. So after everything is said and done, it still remains a great mystery, not easily explainable in a rational sense to us. But at the end of the parsha, we have the laws of kashrus. So kashrus is basically a chok. The Torah doesn't give us reasons. The Torah says, "When it's meisabam, you become tamei." The Gemara darshans, "When it's meisa, al tikre when it meisa, ela when it tamto." You become stopped up. It's cholesterol inducing. So just as we know that there are certain foods that are not healthy for us, those are the ones that taste good. So too, there are certain foods that are not healthy for us spiritually. And that's not explainable to us, how that works. I think that we've seen an example of it, though. For instance, latest survey of American Jewry that gives charity, it shows that almost 80% don't give any charity at all anymore. The big boys give a lot. So there's a lot of charity in the Jewish world. But the charity comes from 20–25% of the population. And that pretty much correlates with the observance of kashrus. If after generations of not eating kosher, so then you're not so charitable anymore either. So that's a result, but that's not an explanation. And the understanding, therefore, is that it's a chok. Now, there's almost no area in halacha that is as complicated as the laws of kashrus. Perhaps Shabbat would be equal to it, but Yeridea is an enormous section of halacha and many different opinions and many different standards. There's almost no one size fits all here. And over the generations, layers and layers have been added out of custom or out of societal norms so that they also become part of the diet, so to speak, part of the menu that the Jewish people eat. And the Torah details for us which animals are kosher, can be eaten, and which animals should not be eaten. So in the structure of domesticated animals, So there the Torah says if it has split hooves and it chews its cud, meaning it has a series of stomachs. You know, a cow, a bull has 4 stomachs. And the digestive process is that it regurgitates before it eventually swallows the food. So that became the norm. And basically, the meat that we eat is from bulls, from steers, from cows, from sheep. Not so much from goats anymore, but goats also in the Near East were a staple food. When it comes to birds, to fowl, so there the Torah doesn't give us any criteria. It just names birds that you can't eat. We don't know the exact definition of each of those birds, but it's accepted that we eat, for instance, chickens, doves, and those birds can be eaten. Now, there arose in the 16th century and in the 17th century especially the question regarding the American turkey. It was unknown in Europe and in the Middle East. It was indigenous to North America. Is it kosher or not? So here you run into the question whether or not it requires a tradition. In other words, to make something kosher, does it have a tradition somehow of being kosher? So an extreme example would be that in certain Jewish societies in the Near East, they ate grasshoppers. And they had a tradition regarding which grasshoppers you could eat or not. Now, to the Western mind and the Western taste, grasshoppers are not on the menu. Nevertheless, it had a tradition. But turkeys never had a tradition because it never existed in these parts of the world. So in the 18th century, especially in all the poskim, there are great discussions whether or not turkeys are to be judged a kosher fowl or not, because it has no tradition. The majority opinion by which the world certainly abides today is that turkeys are kosher. It's a kosher fowl. And their opinion is based on the fact that a turkey is really a big chicken, which may or may not be true. It certainly is a different type of fowl than the chicken. And then you had ducks and geese. So ducks and geese also had traditions. But nevertheless, from the time of the Chassam Sofer onwards, which is the 19th century, the turkeys were judged to be a kosher bird. Today, no one thinks twice about the use of turkeys as a food. But we are going to be faced with different technologies completely. So what shall we say will be with them? There's today the ability to construct meat from cells. In other words, you don't have to kill the chicken. You take a cell from the chicken and you develop it. They're able to do it today, and you end up with, with chicken. What is that? Does that remain chicken, or is it something else? Is it meat or dairy or parv? There already are tshuvas on the matter. And the main kashrus organizations in the world already are dealing with it. Because to a certain extent, that's the wave of the future. If you're able to do it on a mass basis, industrial basis, then you don't need the whole thing with the chickens. You have 1,000 cells and you're in business. So that's something that the halacha until now has not envisioned. However, we do have precedents for these things. For instance, the whole question about gelatin. Gelatin was manufactured from the hides and hooves of pigs. It's a fat that comes from it, and then you can make gelatin out of it through a chemical process. Now, the chemical process destroys everything about the pigs. And there's only left this process that it somehow congeals, that it gels. Is that kosher or not? And till today, there is a great discussion regarding it. Rabbi Grodzinski in the Shilas and Shuvas Achiezer was of the opinion that it's kosher, that the original origin of this is long since gone, been destroyed by the chemical process that has followed, and therefore it's kosher. And for the first half of the 20th century, at least, in many Orthodox homes in Europe and in the United States, gelatin was used as a kosher product. No one thought twice about it. After the war, there was a famous tshuva from Rabbi Aaron Kotler. The tshuva arose because Barton's Candy then, which was the Orthodox candy company, wanted to make marshmallows. To make marshmallows, you had to use gelatin. How could the Jewish people be without marshmallows? So therefore, the Shaila was asked, and it was asked, they asked Rabbi Aaron Kotler. Rabbi Aaron Kotler wrote a long tshuva. It's printed in a sefer called Noam, in which he disagreed with Reb Chaim Eiser, and which he said that it's not kosher. And that spawned the whole industry of kosher gelatin, which is what we have today. So the kosher gelatin today is either from vegetables or from fish, kosher fish, or from kosher cows and bulls, etc., that the skin and bones that were taken were after the shechita, soaked and salted, etc., and therefore Rabbi Aaron, however, agreed that it's not fleshik. So you have an example of how times change. And the question of kashrus remains a difficult question. Here in Israel, for many years, the Rabbanut accepted gelatin as being kosher, especially with elite candy. Over the last 25 years, the Rabbanut has changed and has become more stringent, if we can use that word, whatever. And it no longer accepts it. A lot of it is because the other gelatin, the real kosher gelatin, is available, but it's much more expensive. Drives the price of the product up. In determining kashrus, can you take into account the cost as well? So that's another area that's discussed in halakha. And the Ramah says, "Behefsid meruba," we are much more lenient. How do you decide that? So that's part of the complexity of the issues. And because people fiercely defend their type of kashrus over someone else's type, so therefore we have all of these different opinions and different certifications which exist regarding kashrus, when if you read in the Torah, it looks to be pretty simple. But when it comes to translating it into practical action and behavior, it's very, very complicated. Chananya ben Akash Omer HaKadosh Baruch Hu l'Zakos Yisrael v'chachir lahem Torah mitzvot shenemar Adonai chafetz aman tzidko yagdil Torah v'yadir.